All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in. I'm Michael Donnoe from Donnoe & Associates. You'll see me again at your exam time, whether you're testing for Captain or BC. And I'll be there just to help administer the exam process, but I'm not going to be one of your writers at all. The handout that you have is, as you've discovered, fairly generic. We use the same handout when we do police exams, when we do general municipal stuff, as we do exams for public agencies all over the nation. Our background isn't in fire service, but it's actually in industrial organizational psychology. So that is, we're subject matter experts in test design, validation, and defense. Exam time, you may see a few other folks from our office. A little bit more information is about us right there. I've been doing this for the last 20 years, and for the other folks from our office, Dr. Donnoe is leading the exam process from our office in Sacramento, and he's been doing this for over 40 years. The exam process that you're going to be going through, whether you're testing for captain or battalion chief, has been designed from the ground up for central fire. We're not using a generic process or something off the shelf that's canned. With that in mind, we always start off an exam process with what we call a job analysis. That is, we want to make sure that all of the exam components reflect how you do work here. We do exams, and in particular fire exams for Captain and BC, all over the West Coast, and then we do written exams all over the nation. So we want to make sure that all of the exam questions, all of the problems and grading elements, and the grading criteria accurately reflect how work is actually performed here. So you won't have to be sort of gearing yourself for a generic idea of what a fire captain or battalion chief does, and we won't be looking for how it's done in somebody else's agency. But you should feel very comfortable giving a real-world answer for central fire as we go through all of the exam pieces. Our company is responsible for developing all of the exam components. We develop about 150% of what's actually going to be used in the overall exam, and then that's reviewed and approved by subject matter experts from your department. They review it to make sure that, okay, we're staying focused and appropriate, we're actually testing you for the job level and appropriate for the rank and so on. We do these kinds of fire exams for huge agencies as well as small agencies. So we want to make sure that everything that we give you, from a question to an exam problem, is real life for what you can expect on the job as a captain or as a battalion chief. As we write the written test, we have access to all of the sources that are on the reading list, from the books all the way down to the internal documents, and we look at those for how they're actually going to be used on the job. We don't want to write out of trivia. We don't want to write out of things that you'd have to memorize the text for. It's not an open book test. So we have to look at these in terms of what can you realistically know without having to look it up, and what would you need to know in order to do the job of a fire captain or a battalion chief. As you're studying your internal references, study those for how they're actually used on the job, and study the ones that are most directly relevant to your job. So if you're studying and preparing to test as a fire captain, study for what the company officer does, what your roles and responsibilities are with the first few engines to show, or apparatus to show up at an emergency scene, and what their responsibilities are. These are the kinds of things we like to write out of. If you're testing for BC, we're not only going to be looking at, okay, what does a chief officer do, but because you're going to be responsible for supervising and managing company officers, we're also going to be looking at a little bit of, okay, what do the company officers have to do? Because you're ultimately going to be responsible for their safety and their actions out there. So keep that in mind as you're studying these. As you're studying the IFSTA sources, I know they're like 2 inches thick. I recommend study the highlights. They've tried to break down the chapters in there to make it easy for you to kind of study. Keep in mind that most of your studying of these is going to be a refresher for you. You're already very well trained and experienced, and you are ready for this. Don't study it for memorization of facts, because it's not the way we write these. Study it for refreshing the stuff that you already know, because that's important. You are already ready for this. As IFSTA breaks down their chapters, they'll highlight certain areas. They'll even use a graphic or a chart or something and write down like a little explanation to illustrate a piece of the text. Those are good areas to study from, particularly if you get to something that you maybe aren't as comfortable with, you feel like you need a little bit of extra time studying, go over that in a little bit more detail and really study those highlight pieces in there, because those will help you learn the text. We get asked a lot. I know that there's little study questions at the end of each chapter. Those aren't on the test, so we didn't plagiarize those. Those might be helpful to you in your rehearsing the text and make sure that you know what's in there, but those aren't going to be on the test itself. So, one thing we've heard from lots of different firefighters and lots of different agencies is what's been helpful for them as they've practiced, particularly for the external sources, those IFSTA sources, is train your fire crew in a piece of that. So take a chapter, take a piece of that, and sit down with whoever's on your crew and just train them. Not only will it help you learn the source better, but most importantly, you're going to get comfortable speaking in front of groups. And not that public speaking is this big important thing, but the more comfortable you are speaking in front of different people, the more comfortable you will be in front of the assessors. And we found time and time again, many different agencies have said that's how their firefighters have trained, is just to take those sources, even your internal sources, and just take 15 minutes, 30 minutes during your shift and train everybody on your crew in a little piece. And then they'll give you feedback on how it sounded to them and how you can maybe improve your public speaking if necessary. It always helps to get used to speaking in front of people. I've been doing this for 20 years. I still get nervous doing this. I know that you probably don't do a lot of public speaking on your job, or even if you do, it doesn't hurt to get used to it. We've heard when we work with police officers, they don't have the option of having a nice fire crew where they can work with, so we tell them, go to Toastmasters. For you, work with your crew, because you're going to know what sounds best as you're really training them on that particular piece of the text. So, yes?
So the IFSTA questions, basically, are you saying that you weed out the kind of the subjective questions, like, you know how you can interpret an answer either way through IFSTA?
Exactly.
You have to refer to how did IFSTA kind of perceive it versus, you know, black and white, this is what this does, this is what this does.
We can't write questions based on inferences or based on like summaries of the text. We just have to draw them exactly from the text. And so as we write questions out of IFSTA or out of your internal sources, we really look at, okay, the text says, you know, if your internal source says the first engine at a hazmat shall do X first, okay, that's the kind of stuff we write on. Okay. So where IFSTA, I know, is a little bit more open-ended and more like, hey, best practices is to ladder in this area, not this area. That's the kind of stuff we'll write from. It's like,
and I've been going over like kind of the purpose of acting as a role model is to represent your, you know, be organization, profession. You know what I mean? It can be.
And that's good, yeah. And those are fine. Those will help you for the assessment center. What we really want to have you focus on for the written test is how are you going to use this on the job? Okay. And testing management theories and whatnot that I know IFSTA covers isn't as important as saying, okay, if you're the captain, you're responsible for the safety of your crew or of these people, so study that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Is it multiple choice?
It is.
The
whole question, or the whole test, yes.
Multiple choice.
Yes. And with the multiple choice exams, there's just one correct answer per question. So if you don't short yourself, if you read down and you say, okay, A is definitely correct, before you bubble it in, make sure you read B, C, and D, because one of those might be more correct. We don't write trick questions. We're not trying to catch you in a lie or see how many you get wrong. There's no penalty for guessing. If you leave it blank, you're definitely going to get a 0 on that question. If you guess, you at least have a 25% chance of getting it right. It doesn't hurt to guess. One question on the written test is going to be worth just a fragment of a point overall in your final score. So if you guess on it, it's really not the end of the world. Our rule of thumb for written test questions, as you're taking a written test, whether it's for BC or for captain, spend about 1 minute per question. If you're really flying through that, what I always tell people is, if you're done with 20 questions in less than 10 minutes, take a break. Push your chair back, clear your head, take a break. You're probably going too fast. You will have enough time to complete them and be comfortable with them. But if you push yourself, it's not a hot dog eating contest. It's not a speed contest. You don't have to see how many you can get done as fast as you can. Just relax, you'll have enough time to complete the questions. And make sure that you read all of the options and the question stem carefully, because that can be key to your success. So for example, we do like to write questions that say, okay, the first in truck at a third alarm shall do blah, or whatever it might be. And we'll list everything you have to do. Read it carefully to make sure you say, okay, what's the first thing I have to do? That's not one of the questions, but that's the kinds of things we like to write from. Yes?
How many questions will there be?
Probably about 100. So it hasn't been determined yet because we've got way too many questions right now. We're going to thin it out. Our goal is about 100. If it's less than 100, it's fine too. So usually we aim for about 75 to 125.
And then the time frame is set?
Usually about 2 hours,
Okay.
but even that hasn't been set yet. So if you're testing for captain, it really depends on how many people apply. What we often do, and what we've been doing very, very frequently, is administer the written test and the assessment center simultaneously. And again, none of the schedules or none of this has been determined yet. The reason for doing that is we'll end up giving you about 5 hours on the written test. During that time, that will pull you out for things like an emergency or for a personnel issue or something like that. So that way your end result is you'll have more than enough time for the written test, but it becomes kind of a time management exercise. That way, just as when you're working in the captain's office in the station, you'll be working on something important and you get toned out to a call. We'll do the same thing at an assessment center. I can't guarantee that's what we're going to do, but that's what we do more often than not in the assessment centers. It ends up being a lot more time for you on the written test than it normally would have been when we do it that way. So, read all the test questions carefully. Again, there's just one correct answer per question, whether you're testing for captain or BC. And again, of course, if you think A is right, rule out B, C, and D. What we recommend is dissect the questions with your pencil. So if you're really stuck on a question, circle a word or two that can pull out for you. Cross out the answers you know are definitely wrong. If you can at least narrow it down so you have a 75% chance or 50% chance of getting it right, if you have to guess, at least cross out the ones you know are wrong rather than just blindly picking. That'll be really helpful to you. And we always say, again, it's just one correct answer per question. So if A is definitely correct, but B would be correct if you cite a different source on the reading list or if you write a paragraph's worth of explanation, that means B is wrong. Just save yourself the worry and the protest because it's not going to be answered. Just answer A. So each question at the very top of the question is also going to say where we wrote it from. So that way you'll feel comfortable. You can say, wait a minute, are you asking me the best procedure for laddering a building according to IFSTA or according to us? So read the top of the question, and if it says it's from IFSTA or if it says it's from you, then you'll know, okay, I can give that kind of answer. Our goal is to make sure that the entire test reflects your best practices, but IFSTA in general is fairly, generic. And so, as are all the nationally used sources. And so some of what's going to come out of the IFSTA source or whatever nationally used source we have will look like, okay, this is the best practice according to IFSTA. And then when you see your specific question, you say, okay, here's actually what we do. First an engine shall do blah, if that makes sense. Good. Yes?
Percentage of what questions will be on the IFSTA versus our SOPs, EOGs?
I don't. Generally, we try to go for, I think, I'm trying to remember what's on your reading list, but generally between 25 and 50%, more or less, will be your internal stuff. So, any other questions about the written test? Yes?
So you reference a written essay exam on here too, but if I missed it,
I don't anticipate we're going to do that.
Okay.
So if we do that, it'll be administered at the time of the assessment center.
Okay, so what would be the formula for scoring that then? Would it be like for a panel?
It would. Then the expert panel of assessors would score that, so the fire service assessors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the same reference then to the supplemental questionnaire that's for the management, the battalion chief?
We didn't write the supplemental questions, and that's something done internally apart from our process.
Okay, so that's not scored.
That's not a part of my process. Yeah. So if there is an essay exam, it would be something at the assessment center. And the way we've used essay exams in the past is, okay, here's some multiple choice questions, and then here's a couple questions like, here's a firefighter working for you who has a personnel related question. help this person, help get this person an answer. And then you can write a short essay of like, okay, here's how I'm going to do it as a captain or as a BC. I don't anticipate we're going to do that. We've also used it in terms of like, okay, you just did an emergency or you just did a personnel action, now document it. Give us all the documentation you'd normally do, whether it's an email or whether it's a form. Again, I don't anticipate we'll do that, but if we do, we'll make sure it's pretty clear ahead of time. But they take forever to score, and so I don't anticipate we're going to go that way. So.
Do we know, can I ask if the supplemental question, if that's a score? It's not, okay. It's just, it's not utilized then in the exam process?
It's to see writing ability, thought process.
Okay.
There's character behind the candidate kind of thing.
Would that be shown to the raters in the testing process?
No.
Okay. Thanks.
For the raters in the testing process, when you show up at the assessment center, we're not going to give them your resumes or your applications or anything like that. They're just going to see you when you show up in their room. So that way, if you're testing for an emergency, you can feel comfortable saying, okay, I'm here for the emergency and I can do hopefully my best. Or if you're here for a personnel thing, they want to focus all their attention just on you handling a personnel issue or whatever it may be. You'll see some general samples of kinds of assessment exercises we do here on page 3. And again, this is a sample of what we generally do, but not a promise of what we shall do. We will have an emergency on both of your tests, whether it's captain or BC. Very obviously, we'll have an emergency. When you show up at the emergency, keep in mind for all of the assessment center, we want to see how good you are as the rank you're testing for. So it's a litmus test of where you are today in relation to the requirements of the job for captain or for BC. We know that you're already good at your current job, that's why you're here. But we want to see, it's not the assessment center isn't a training exercise and isn't designed to give you feedback or advice on how to do better in the future, but it really is just a litmus test. Today, how do you relate just to the requirements of whatever job you're applying for? It's important to say, and it's worth saying, come in as the rank being tested. So come in as a chief, come in as a captain. Don't come in like you want the job, come in like you have the job. That command presence and that confidence will really carry you through the overall exam. The most common thing we hear from assessors on captain and BC exams as a reason why people get low scores or are unsuccessful is that they weren't acting like the rank they were being tested for. So for example, if they're testing for fire captain, we've seen people, it just happened last week, we did a fire captain exam in a different state, and one person showed up at a room and contents fire, had a couple of other resources show up at the same time, lost the other resources in the ICS, lost his own company in the ICS, and so just confused himself with everything. We don't write complicated exams, but you should be comfortable enough with the incident command system that you can know who you are and know what you have showing up or what's already there and how to assign them. Or if you don't, get somebody to take over. When you're taking the captain's exam, keep in mind that you're probably going to be in charge of the emergency for a while until the chief officer shows up, and then you're expected to transfer command to that person. Those are generally the kinds of emergencies we do. We may also do some small emergencies like snapshots to say, okay, give us your size up here, thanks, give us your size up here, okay, thanks. Talk to us about this tactical assignment in this. Tell us what you do in this emergency. You're the third in truck and you've been assigned to blank by the incident commander. What are you doing? Who are you talking to? Stuff like that. So you should understand the functions that different units may have on an emergency and who you'll be communicating with, what you expect of them, what's going to be going on in an emergency. We try to structure the process so you shouldn't have to memorize a test process. You don't take tests on the job, so knowledge of how to take an assessment center is irrelevant to your success in here. Your success is entirely dependent on you really showing up as that rank being tested. If we haven't made it clear enough for you, in a test component, whether you're face-to-face with the assessors or in the written test, on what's expected of you, ask for clarification. It's much more important, and you don't look bad at all if you ask for clarification. It's much more important that you ask a couple of times, like, can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understand. Can you clarify this for me? Or, okay, tell me this again. That's okay. I'd much rather have you ask a few extra times than walk out of the room and say, I don't know what just happened to me. So it's your responsibility to ask for clarification if you're confused. We won't know that the test is confusing you unless you tell us. Otherwise, it's just going to be full steam ahead. So if there's anything we can do to help clarify for you, please ask for clarification. Again, this is not a negative reflection at all. We really want to make sure that we create the causes and conditions of your success.
Do you guys find that the results tend to drop when you run the assessment and the written simultaneously, or do you get typically about the same scores?
About the same.
Really?
Yeah, exactly the same. So when we do the written a few weeks in advance, which some agencies by their contracts have to, sometimes the scores at the assessment center drop only because people then take their foot off the gas.
Right.
So they're like, great, done with the written, I don't have to study.
I just meant being
Yeah.
interrupted in between you actually taking the written test and.
We find most of the fire agencies that we work with that doing that, they tend to like it better. So we just did one in a Midwest state where it was our first time with them, and the union president and a couple of the shop stewards were all taking the captain test, and they said, we don't know about this taking the written test at the same time thing. And after it was all done, they said, okay, now we like it. That was better. We get it. So hopefully, whatever we end up doing for you, again, it's really dependent on the schedule and what we can fit in the day. Hopefully, whatever we do for you is something that you feel comfortable with. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, if you feel confused at any point, it's critical that you say something and ask for clarification. Our goal is to make sure that you feel comfortable throughout the process. The only thing on your mind should be just being a successful captain or BC. You shouldn't have to worry about anything else. With that in mind, we'll have some, fairly strict rules, and some of them are kind of dumb at the assessment center, like we're not going to let you use your phones. I know that life gets in the way and you may need to be on call for your job or for family. If you need to bring your phone and use it, we just have to monitor your phone call or your text or whatever it is. I know that's dumb. It's just a few years ago in an LA agency, one candidate had his phone out because he was like, is the baby out yet? It was a pretty important phone call. And 3 other people protested against the guy, said, oh, he's using his phone. So it's a blanket rule in every agency, whether it's humongous like that one or small like yours, that phone use just has to be monitored. I know it's dumb. We'll have a few other fairly strict rules at the assessment center. They're entirely designed just to help you be successful and to make it a comfortable day for you. They're not designed to be mean or punitive in any way. So help us help you and go along with some of the guidelines we have when you show up at the assessment center.
As far as back to the emergency scenario, will we be able to break anything in as far as taking notes? Or are you going to give us a...
We'll have everything you need at the assessment center, so please don't bring anything in with you. So we usually like to have a couple blank pieces of paper out there in whatever exercise it is. If you're like me, I kind of need to write stuff down in order to remember it, and so that'll be there as an option. Unless we tell you we're going to read and grade what you're writing, consider that it won't be read or graded, so if it's an emergency, we'll try to have a blank piece of paper out there for you, so that way if you need to jot stuff down, I know you should track your companies that are showing up. That's important. That'll just be for your use only. There's no upgrade or downgrade for taking or not taking notes. It's just a tool. If you use it or if you don't use it, it's entirely up to you. Use a tool if you need it. If you don't need it, not a problem. We want to make sure that you're successful. I see a question here?
Yeah, so just for clarification, it's going to be a blank sheet of paper. We're not going to have like a ICS 205 or a specific form that we would...
It hasn't been developed yet, so I can't say for certain, but our goal is to make it a process that supports your success. So I don't know what that will look like yet. Some agencies want the ICS forms. Some agencies only want blank pieces of paper. We haven't determined that yet, but we want to make sure that it's something good.
Anything that we're going to be used, and for clarification, anything that we're going to be used, you're going to provide.
Exactly.
Can't bring it in.
Exactly, yeah. So please don't bring anything in, quick reference cards, ICS worksheets, anything like that.
Yeah, that's like no DOT manual, no PG&E pamphlet, no nothing that.
Nothing at all.
Take our scenario that you're gonna have everything for us.
We'll have everything for you. If you bring anything in from outside, I know people get nervous, they forget what I say, or maybe they do it anyway. They have to stop the exam, they'll have you put it away, and then they can restart it again. So that includes resumes. Listen carefully to what the exercises are. We just did an exam down the Central Valley where during an emergency exercise, candidates were stopping the emergency and saying, "Oh, let me tell you about my resume." Don't do that. You wouldn't do that in a real emergency. Don't do that here. We only want to hear what the question is or what the exam exercise is. So candidates that are coached for a test instead of being coached for a job, which you're already being coached for the job, you're doing that on the job. If you start getting coached for an exam process, we find that that doesn't help. In fact, it can really hurt. There are exam prep classes out there. They cost hundreds to thousands of dollars. And time again, when we hear candidates going to those, we hear the wrong things come out, and we hear them say, that was a waste of money and that hurt me. Candidates that go to these are taught to argue with the assessors. I know that sounds weird, but it happens. Like, no, we're going to talk about my resume, or I'm going to answer this question, even though that's not what you're asking me. So you shouldn't have to pay thousands of dollars to get a job. This is just, what I'm doing today is designed to familiarize you with the exam. What you should focus your study on is really getting ready for the job, not for the test. So if you're preparing for certain kinds of exam exercises, that's not as helpful as just really getting ready for, okay, what would happen if this situation came up in real life as a captain or as a BC? What am I going to do as a captain or as a BC? The other kinds of exam exercises we'll have, again, we will have an emergency for both. We will have you at some point make an oral presentation. And an oral presentation can be short, 5 minutes, could be longer, 15 to 20 minutes. Whatever it is, we'll give you some study time ahead of time for you to read a problem prompt, make some notes, and come in and make a presentation to assessors. For that, you're not expected to fill up every spare minute of the time. That's the maximum time, whatever time we give you on it, whether it's 5, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it may be. We'll let you know ahead of time how much time you have remaining. We do what I tell the assessors, it's a kinder, gentler process. So if you were testing for entry firefighter, we might have a bell out there that cuts you off at a certain point. For this, we don't want to do that. So when you get to about a minute till the end of your time, they'll just say, okay, about 1 minute left, so you can begin to wrap it up. When you get to the end of your time, they'll have timers out. They'll say, okay, you're about at the end. They'll listen for a sentence break or the end of a thought to kind of transition over to the next piece of their exam. If you finish early, that's okay too, but keep in mind that the goal is that you use up most of the time in whatever presentation it is. So one negative thing that we hear from assessors as to why candidates sometimes aren't as successful is, wait, we gave you 15 minutes and you used 3. We followed up and said, do you want to add anything? And you said no. So you don't have to be a fast talker. But keep in mind that as you're balancing your presentation time to them, if you run out of time, they can't extend it for you if you didn't get to say everything you wanted to say. So try to get everything out. Then if you need to come back to it and clarify some points, you can. But try to balance your presentation time. And again, this is where other firefighters and fire departments have said to us over the years that training their fire crews can be really helpful. Say, okay, we're training you on IFSTA Chapter 3, and I'm going to give myself 15 minutes. When you find that you really take 45, you could say, all right, I guess I need to trim myself down, or kind of look at balancing my presentation time more. So that's been helpful to people as they're kind of getting ready for these things.
And we can expect the topic to be fire related, or would it be?
It would be
style?
job related, and so everything's going to be job related. So if you're testing for fire captain, it might be something like, hey, you have a public contact thing where somebody came into your station, or you're out at a emergency scene. Let's make a presentation on talking to this person. Or it might be more of a role play oriented thing where we say, okay, you're going to be meeting with a business owner to talk about locked and chained exit doors. How are you going to, give that one to them, whatever it may be.
And in that scenario, would you have a member of your agency acting as if they were the other individual?
The panel actually would be.
Okay.
And so the panel's all going to be fire service subject matter experts that are recruited by your department. And so you can feel very comfortable saying, okay, blah, 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 and it'll be, real life, fire service related, and they'll understand it. So, did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. So
Good.
basically you're addressing the panel. It's not as if the panel is watching you as if they were an audience and you're putting on what I mean?
And we'll let you know what kind of presentation you'll be making, but if it's unclear when you're actually doing the presentation or preparing for it, please ask. Because sometimes we might say, okay, this is a role play. Pretend they're your crew and direct your presentation to the panel as if they were your crew. Where we might say, okay, this is not a role play. We want you to talk about your testing for BC. Tell this panel what you're going to do as the BC. They're just the panel. So we'll clarify that for you before you make the presentation, but if it's not clear, please ask for clarification because we want you to be comfortable coming in. It is, and I can't stress this enough, it is really important if you're unsure of what to do or if you're confused by something, please ask for clarification. As an example of this, again, to pick on the poor Central Valley agency we just worked with, we had a fire captain exam for them and in-basket exercise. One particular item in the in-basket, 3 candidates were totally confused by it and never bothered to ask. So they went in and the panel had to clarify it for them, which is fine. But if they had asked, I could have clarified it for them. So if you're preparing for something or if you're face-to-face with the panel, please ask for clarification. The panels that you're going to be meeting will all be very nice people. They're going to be recruited by your department, and they'll be subject matter experts or community members or whatever it may be in relation to that particular panel that you're looking at. Again, I don't know what kind of panel makeup we're going to have right now because we haven't yet recruited them or finished the development of the exam.
All right, how do you go, will we know who you are consulting for the final product, so to speak? Like, you go back, you select questions, probably design the test, and then, if I understood you correctly, you come back to this organization and you bounce it off certain individuals?
It'll be your chief and his designee.
So the fire chief and...
Yes.
Okay.
So that way they'll be reviewing it to make sure, okay, this is really, what captains do, or that's a little too hard, or hey, we never have that kind of emergency. And that's what they're really reviewing it for, is appropriateness for the rank and appropriateness for the department.
Chief, do you intend to bounce it off like captains, battalion chiefs, and firefighters? Or do you have an idea of who you would share that information with? I'm not looking to go tackle a resource, I'm trying to get an idea of the perception.
So the balance is between test, security, confidentiality, so likely we'll involve battalion chief.
Okay.
Yeah, we wouldn't ask anybody that's not at the rank already or above the rank to review any exam elements because they're not subject matter experts in that rank. So we may have different kinds of exam pieces. We will at some point have oral questions for you. The oral questions that they're going to be asking may be based not only on the duties and responsibilities of a fire captain or battalion chief, but also on your qualifications for promotion. And again, I don't know this for certain, but because everything's still up in development, if we are asking about your qualifications for promotion, saying, okay, tell us about how you've prepared for this, they're not just looking for a generic oral resume. The bad way to do that is just to say, here I am, and here's what I've done, and here's all the classes, blah. Tell them why it's important. Tell them what you've done, how it relates to the job, how it relates to the district, and why this is important. So if you have a doctorate in fire science, they could figure out why that's important, but they don't. We want to give you the time to do the problem analysis work. Tell us why that's important. Tell us what you've learned from it, how you've used it, how it's important for the job, and how you're going to use it, and how it relates to the district. That's important. If you don't have, some people get nervous before any qualifications appraisals say, I haven't done anything. Yes, you have. So reflect on what you've done in your career in the fire service or your career here if you've worked with multiple agencies, and really think about what kinds of training you've had, what kinds of experience you've had, and what that means, what you've really learned from it. So if you work in a station that does mostly grass fires, or if you work in a station that does mostly surf rescues, talk about what you've learned from that, what kind of things that you've been able to take away from that experience that have really made you a good candidate for whatever you're testing for, captain or BC. So keep that in mind. We want you to do that problem analysis work for the assessors on that. Any questions on any of this? Some people worry sometimes that the kinds of exams are going to be, will give you the absolute worst day of your career on an emergency or personnel issue. We won't give you the worst day of your career, but it might be the worst day of your month. So it will be bread and butter, but it's going to be a little bit challenging in relation to the requirements of the job. So keep in mind what rank you're testing for, particularly if it's a station supervision, a management problem, a program management problem, anything like this, and what you would actually realistically do as a captain or a BC. Again, you need to step up to that rank. The most common reason people are unsuccessful in the exams is that they don't act like what they're being tested for. So they act like a firefighter and they're testing for BC, and really what assessors look for is for firefighter to fire captain, the kind of common buzzword, there's even a book about it, is making the transition from buddy to boss. And that's really one thing that the assessors keep in mind as you're doing a station supervision exercise. When you're transitioning up to battalion chief, the real common thing that the assessors are looking for is that you are taking that wider view. You're not putting yourself in as the tactical level, but you're really thinking strategically of, okay, what's not just what's happening today as a result of my actions, but what's going to happen 6, 9, 12 months down the road. How is this affecting other people in and outside the district? So really think with that wider perspective, and that's really what the assessors kind of have their radar on for in these exams.
So
Yes?
we have the week of the 26th for the test in August. Do you have an actual date?
Not yet. After the final filing date's done, then we'll be able to develop a final schedule and kind of figure out how we can schedule people. Our goal for the exam is to have you in one time. So we know that your time is valuable. You need to schedule your life around this, and we understand that. And also, you're valuable to the department, and they can't have you off shift for three days in a row. So our goal for the exam generally is to have you there for half a day to an entire day. So for a half a day, it would look like you'd show up around 7:30 and leave around lunchtime, or you'd show up around lunchtime and leave around 5-ish. If you're there for the entire day, it would be something like show up about 9 and leave about 4. Those are generally the kinds of schedules we try to do. There will be downtime in the schedule. Inevitably. We can't help that. It's either give you some downtime and some floating breaks, or give the assessors a lot of downtime, and they're here donating their time because they believe in the process and they believe in the department. And so when there is downtime, I apologize for that. Just use it to relax. Don't stress yourself out. I know that's easier said than done, but we see so many times candidates will come out of one exercise and then psych themselves out. I know you're used to on the job, after you finish a big emergency or a big event, you'll kind of debrief it with everybody. If you're doing the internal debrief, you're going to psych yourself out. Just throw it behind you as you finish one of the exercises. So if you've come out of an emergency, or if you've come out of a personnel exercise, whatever it may be, just get emotionally, mentally, physically ready for the next one. Don't dissect and debrief yourself on what just happened, because you will spin yourself into being too stressed out. Bring food at the exam. Please bring food. You'll probably need more bottled water than you think. It's okay to bring a bottle of water in front of the assessors. They understand that your mouth is going to get dry. Don't chew gum in front of the assessors. There's not a scoring point about that, but it looks bad. Please, just one second. Please be professional. So I know that seems dumb, you're already going to be professional, but we were just asked to do a training presentation in Colorado on how people can do well in exam processes. And we see time and time again, when assessors come in to pick you up for an exam, we'll give you a schedule so you'll know when you can expect to be picked up for the exam. Please be ready for them. So if you see that your time's coming up, okay, at 10 o'clock they're going to call me out. About 5 minutes till 10, get ready, shake yourself off, take that last drink of water and kind of get ready for them to come. What we've seen so many times is a chief officer will come in the room and say, "Hi, I'm ready for so-and-so." And then so-and-so will say, literally, we have that a lot. "Okay, let me get my jacket." And they just kind of mosey in. It's like, it's disrespectful to the assessors. That's not a scoring point for them, but it does make an impression on them. Listen to their names. So if they come in and say, "Hi, I'm Michael," look at what they're wearing. They're probably chief somebody. And if you say, "Hi, Michael," it's, again, slightly disrespectful. It's not a scoring point, but it makes an impression, and we want you to be able to make the best impression possible. So call them, "Hi, Chief." Just come in as if you are a professional person. I know you are, but we see it so many times in so many agencies where I know it's a stressful process. Don't let them see that you're unhappy, because they're here donating their time, and it's just disrespectful to them, and it does make an impression. So, you had a question?
I was just wondering, back to the emergency, is there just going to be one emergency or multiple emergencies?
There may be multiple emergencies. We don't know for certain yet. So again, it's still under development.
Okay.
But if there is multiple emergencies, it'll likely be emergencies of different kinds, where we might mix them up and say, okay, here's one emergency where you'll command it until you're relieved by a BC, and then here's lots of little tactical scenarios. That's kind of how we structure it for captain. If you're testing for BC, it'll likely be just probably one really big emergency, and keep in mind that as you're testing for BC, that it may involve more agencies than just yours. And so you have to think about, okay, how do we communicate and work with allied agencies? So,
Attire, Class Bs?
Class Bs, please. Yes. Is that okay with you? Great. Yeah, we recommend Class Bs. Just wear your station uniform. The assessors will probably be dressed the same. It's just what you wear to work. We're not doing a uniform check, and we just want you to be comfortable showing up and comfortable just being yourself in front of the assessors. So
That'll be the case for the battalion's chief test as well.
that's what we recommend. And the chief he can overrule me for that if he needs to. For your outside candidates, if people are testing from outside your agency, they may or may not be showing up in uniform. Usually when you test for management, we say uniform or business attire, whatever you're more comfortable with. So Class Bs, that's our preference for everybody, but we recognize that not everybody may be wearing that, so it's really up to you. They can't rate you on what you're wearing anyway. So we will train the raters. We're responsible for making sure that before the raters see you, they're 100% comfortable and ready for the exam. They've practiced it, they've gone over it, they understand what's expected of them, they understand the grading criteria and everything. They won't practice on you. So I know sometimes people worry, if I'm the first person coming in, are they practicing on me? Or if I'm the last person coming in, are they really sick of hearing this stuff and they're just ready to get me out the door? We make sure that we structure a process so there's enough breaks, there's enough downtime for them that they can feel well rested before everybody. They will practice it before seeing any of you, so they're not practicing the exam on any of you. They won't change anybody's scores based on what different people have done. So that means we're not grading this on a curve. So if you come in, do a great job, get a 95 or 100, but you come in and do an even better job, they can't lower your score based on what somebody else did. They always just have to compare your performance back just to the requirements of the job. This may mean that with a small group, everybody's clustered at the top, or even at the bottom of the rating scale. That's not a problem. It's just good feedback for the chief that, okay, everybody's either very well prepared or maybe needs a little bit more seasoning in this particular area. But we're not trying to force a distribution of the scores. Your final score is a function of adding up and averaging all of the scores among all the panels, the written test, and all that stuff. And then we're going to communicate that to the district. So.
Is there a pass-fail?
70 is the pass on any of the assessment center pieces. For the written tests, I don't believe we've structured a pass point, but I have to read your bulletin to make sure and your contract. I don't know for certain. Sometimes union contracts or exam bulletins specify pass points, and that supersedes anything I say, but I don't know for certain.
So if we get a below 70 on one of these scenarios or whatever it may be, do they let you know right there?
They won't let you know. They want you to be able to go through all of them. And so, for example, if you come in and maybe unfortunately you bomb the emergency, you won't know it. You might know it on some level, but they won't tell you. We don't want to say, oh, sorry, go home. because in the unfortunate and unlikely event that we have to throw out the panel, which happened recently, we had a 2-person panel. One of them had an emergency and had to leave, go back to his home agency to command a large incident. So we said, we have to toss the panel. We can't run a panel of 1. So in that case, we didn't want to send anybody home that had failed it already. It's like, well, it's just out of the scoring. It's very, very unlikely that'll happen. That's happened once in 20 years, but that's why we don't want to send you home after that.
So are you saying for the written test, for the IFSTA, you don't have a test generator, right? That you then look at the questions and throw out certain ones because you're trying to make them obviously more relevant to the position?
Exactly.
So would it be safe to say that it behoove us to focus on certain chapters such as leadership versus like the history of blah, 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 blah? You know how it kind of wanders off sometimes?
It kind of wanders off sometimes. Focus on the whole book because we haven't limited ourselves with chapters.
Okay.
We try to balance the items across the whole book because we feel like it's a waste of your time to say study the whole book, but then not like this big. We're going to not give you questions out of this whole section that you probably studied. So study it all, but study it more for a refresher of your skills and a refresher of what you already know. If you're studying it, cramming like you might have done in college or high school for a test, that's not going to be the most helpful to you. Study it for how it's going to be used on the job and really think of it as a skill refresher and a knowledge refresher. Remember that through all of this, you are ready for promotion. You are ready for this opportunity and you are very well prepared. So come in knowing that you are ready for this. If you start to second guess yourself or doubt yourself, that is the biggest critical error that you can make in a written test or an assessment center. In written tests, if you're erasing one question because you say, oh, I rethought about it for 5 minutes and I'm going to fill in another answer. I've been doing this for so long, most of the time when I see an erased answer, the correct answer has been erased. Trust your gut. Trust your training and experience. If you come into an emergency, you are very well trained for these. You are ready for this. So if you come into an emergency and your gut is saying, I need to call an additional resource in here and I need to start setting up rapid intervention and this and that, trust that. Trust that training because it's years of training and experience that's guiding you to do that. If you start to second guess yourself in any of the exam problems or in the written test, it will hurt you. You wouldn't second guess yourself in real life, so don't second guess yourself here. So, and again, as you finish each exam problem, don't stress out about it. When we see all the time with police officer candidates, they'll chain smoke and pace outside the exam because they get so nervous. It doesn't help them at all. Sometimes the people that feel the most nervous have been the most successful. So I had one gal a few years ago, she wanted to leave. She was turning green. She's like, I think I did bad. I'm really worried about everything. She ended up getting a score of 100 from every assessor on every panel. If she had left, she wouldn't have gotten promoted. So don't worry, you will be more nervous than you need to be. But throw it behind you. And if you start to second guess yourself or start to worry about things you've already said, you may be hurting yourself more than you should. And so don't hurt yourself in that way because you are ready for this promotion and you are ready for the job. So keep that in mind as you go through all phases of this. You are ready for this. You are very well trained and you are very experienced. You just have to show that to the assessors. I know this is a very important time for you. You've probably spent months, if not years, getting ready for this promotional opportunity. So our promise throughout this is to treat you with respect, and our goal is to really create the causes and conditions for your success in the exam process. So please let us know if there's anything that you feel uncomfortable about, or if there's any questions that you may have either before or during the process. Our office won't have any contact with you personally. Our contact will all be through your chief. We'd prefer that we do it that way, just that way everybody has the same opportunities. So if you do have any questions later on, or if you weren't able to make it and you're watching it on video and you have any questions, please submit them in writing to the chief. He'll send it to us. We'll respond in writing, and then he'll disperse it to all the candidates. This way everybody receives the same information. Nobody's given any different information. After the exam is over, I know everybody always asks, it takes us 7 to 10 working days to verify the results, to put it all in the computer and triple check it and send it off to your district. So that way it may take them slightly longer to get the results to you. I know you're anxious. I know it's like waiting to see the results of a presidential election. We're going to do our very best to get you the results as soon as possible. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So on the assessment center, there's going to be an oral presentation, some sort of emergency response type simulator, and then a oral interview.
Those aren't guaranteed, so we'll definitely do an emergency, we'll definitely do something where you have to present, and the presentation is as yet to be determined. And there will be at some point some questions that they're going to be asking you on each scenario likely, and then we may even have a separate oral board panel, such as for battalion chief, where we're just going to say, okay, tell us how you prepared for this. So I don't know 100% what's going to be on the test because it's still under development. So we'll let you know the day of the exam what you can expect, and we'll make sure that you're aware of what's going to be going on the day of the exam. But there won't be any further communications to say, okay, this shall be on the exam or anything like that, other than when you show up for it. That's why we say get ready for the job, not get ready for the test. Because if you're getting ready for a test or a generic idea of what's on the test, you may be missing big components of the job that are important. So.
Well, it sounds like we're not going to do any kind, like a group dynamic type exercise.
Absolutely not. We hate those. So, leaderless group exercises are horrible and terrible. So, we don't do leaderless groups. They have limited to zero validity, and you don't sit in the room like angry bees and figure out who's going to be the boss and who's going to talk the most and who's going to be the scribe in real life. So you shouldn't do it on the exam. We're also not going to have something that they call a fishbowl exercise, which you may have heard about from other agencies, where you show up in front of everybody and you grab a question out of a fishbowl and answer it in front of everybody. The only time you're actually going to be graded or scored or evaluated is when you're alone in the room with the assessors. So it'll be you, the assessors. There may be observers in there, but they're observing the assessors. Observers sometimes include my staff, union staff, or human resources staff. If there are any observers in any exercises, they're there to make sure that the exam is administered fairly and consistently and appropriately. They're not there to share information about you at all. The only people who can grade you are the assessors, and they can only grade you on what you actually do or say in the exam exercise. If you're the greatest person in the world, but you don't tell them that, they can't give you credit for it. So you still have to say it or do it in front of the assessors in order to get credit for it. They can't base your score on their prior knowledge of you or their assumptions about your true abilities. It can only be based on what you actually do in the exercise. So we won't have anything where you have to perform in front of each other. You will be in a waiting room or holding room in front of each other, and that staging waiting area, you will be working on preparation for a couple of the panels. You may even be working on a written test during that time, and there's going to be a lot of sitting around and waiting time. And the sitting around and waiting time is inevitable. It's either give you a floating break or give the assessors lots of breaks, and we want to respect their time. So.
Will there possibly be an in-basket exercise? Or?
Possibly. And keep in mind that with any of these kind of exercises that people talk about a lot, like in-baskets or stuff like that, don't study for how in-baskets are developed and administered, because we do them very differently than everybody else. So there's kind of the stock assessment center model, which has very little relation to real life work. And our model is we try to really structure a process that's a job-related test. So the job-related in-basket might be like, okay, you show up as a battalion chief and here's a giant pile of stuff, and go in and meet with the fire chief in 30 minutes and say, okay, here's my concerns about what I'm going to do, and I need your feedback on this. Or if you're the captain, it might be like, here's everything you got when you showed up on shift. Go do your morning briefing with your crew. So we try to make it real life. And so we don't want to give you anything that's wacky, if that helps. Any other questions? Great. And again, if you do have any questions, please submit them in writing. We'll make sure that we respond in writing to everybody. We won't be able to address questions from individuals sent through our office. Chief, is there anything that you want me to cover that I didn't cover, or any questions you have?
No, I think you did a great job.
Thanks.
I emphasize your points that you are, as candidates, well prepared for the positions, that the test is about your preparation that's been going on since day one of your career. And the process will vet out those natural intuitions that will surface during the process. You're going to realize it's going to drive you to conclusions. And you know, it's our interest to have as deep and as robust a list as possible.
We're not looking for good test takers. We're looking for good captains and BCs. And we've designed a process that's designed to look for who's going to be a good captain, who's going to be a good BC today, not who can take a test really well. Everybody always says, oh, I'm not a really good test taker. And the test taker, what we call the fake good approach of, you know, kind of the selling yourself in a way that has no relation to the job, isn't what we focus on. We really focus on come in and do the job of a captain, do the job of a BC, and that's what we're looking for in this. So listen carefully to the questions the assessors are asking you. We don't have them as trick questions, and we want to make sure that you're able to really demonstrate your qualifications for promotion. So, great. Thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this, or if you weren't able to be here, taking the time to watch it on video. And good luck in the exam process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.